It's been less than a month since former Vice President Kamala Harris left the White House and returned to her home state of California. And conversations have swirled about what the 2024 Democratic presidential nominee's next moves will be after losing her bid for the presidency. One of the biggest ideas that's been floated, Harris running for governor of California in 2026. Joining us to break this all down is Brett Samuels, White House reporter here at The Hill. Brett, good to see you. A new survey from Emerson College polling found Harris would be the Democratic frontrunner for governor of California if she jumped into the Golden State's 2026 race. 57% of Democratic primary voters in California said they'd support her, while 17% said they're undecided, and the rest said somebody else. How surprising are these numbers, and could they motivate Harris to announce a run?
Yeah, Judy, I think, they're not terribly surprising, just given that Kamala Harris obviously has this huge name recognition, name ID. She just ran for president, and certainly showed that she could generate some enthusiasm as a candidate at the top of the ballot. Comes from California, previously served obviously as Attorney General. So, I think Kamala Harris probably sees these poll numbers and does think, that she could be encouraged to jump in the race and maybe start off certainly with a healthy lead.
Certainly a healthy lead, as you said. In that same poll, Californians sounded off on a number of issues. 62% said California should spend more on firefighting staffing and equipment following those LA wildfires. 56% said mass deportations of undocumented immigrants in California are a bad thing. And the majority said California's high-speed rail project is a good use of state funds. What should Harris make the center of her campaign if she does announce a run?
Yeah, I think if the former vice president does announce a gubernatorial campaign, we would probably see her center a lot of the same issues that she centered in her presidential campaign, which is protecting reproductive rights, obviously investing in infrastructure, which is something the Biden administration liked to tout. When we saw that high-speed rail support, obviously there. So certainly, and then, I think standing up to the Trump administration is something that she could tout that Californians would get behind, just given the state's tendency to sort of lean leftward, as we saw with the opposition to mass deportations.
Brett Samuels, thank you so much for joining us. House Republicans are one step closer to forwarding Trump's massive legislative agenda. After weeks of negotiations inside the Republican Party, late last night, the House Budget Committee approved a budget resolution. The win for Republican House leaders comes as the lower chamber battles the Senate over the endless debate of a one or two bill agenda. Now, the question is, will the Senate halt momentum on their plans to move forward with a separate resolution? Joining me now is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell. Mychael, good to see you. Inside the plan is this $1.5 trillion, that's trillion with a capital T, in spending cuts, $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. It seems like a big win for Speaker Mike Johnson. What else do we know about what's inside this massive budget resolution?
Yeah, hey Judy, look, those are the confines and essentially the instructions that now House committees are going to take with them and use to craft this one big beautiful bill, as Republicans like to call it. As you mentioned, it has a floor of $1.5 trillion in spending cuts, which means that House Republicans are going to have to find at least that number of cuts across committees, across government. But there's a target of $2 trillion. So they're really going to try to reach that $2 trillion level. And that's because that whether or not they reach the $2 trillion level, that's going to have an impact on the $4.5 trillion cap that they have for the deficit impacts of some of the tax portion. We're talking about extending those 2017 Trump tax cuts, things like no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security that President Trump had touted on the campaign trail. So the budget resolution is essentially the instructions that the committees are now going to use to find those cuts and figure out how they're going to extend those tax cuts in the coming months as they try to craft this reconciliation package.
So instruction manual, got it. During the debate yesterday, Republicans struck down dozens of Democratic amendments. While the party doesn't necessarily need any support from Democrats, were they able to negotiate anything inside the resolution?
Not Democrats. There were some Republican v. Republican negotiations, and we saw two amendments actually be accepted towards the end, ones that were introduced by Republicans. But on the Democratic side, no. The short answer is no. All of those amendments, there were more than 30, were all struck down. Now, this is going to be a Republican-only bill. It's because Democrats are not supportive of the vast majority of the proponents in there. Now, there is a few issues that Democrats have said that they would be willing to talk about, things like the state and local tax deduction cap. That's called the SALT cap. We hear a lot about it. It's something that's really important to folks in high-tax blue states. Think places like California, New York, and New Jersey. But Republicans have shown no appetite to negotiate with Democrats and talk to Democrats about this. And then remember, Judy, this is going to be either one massive sprawling bill or two smaller but still significant bills. So Democrats are not going to support it. Even if they support the SALT portion, they're still not going to support the entire package because of so many aspects of it that they oppose. So no, this will be a Republican-only bill. We did see that attempt to protest the legislation yesterday, a 12-hour markup. It went from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Again, more than 30 amendments, but all of those were struck down.
Michael, I'm interested in what you think this means for Senator Lindsey Graham's plan. The Senate Budget Committee panel has approved a separate budget resolution that only focused on boosting defense, border security. Will the Senate still move forward even though the House has their plan approved?
Yeah, Judy, that is the question that I'm still waiting to hear the answer of, trying to figure out the answer to. The Senate had sort of been okay with allowing the House to move first, see what the House could come up with. It's clear that it's more difficult to wrangle House Republicans around something than it is Senate Republicans, because House Republicans are dealing with that extremely thin majority. They also have a very ideologically diverse conference. But when the House conference began to struggle, that's when the Senate came in, and that's when Lindsey Graham came in, and he kickstarted this two-bill reconciliation strategy. But now that the House has actually gotten something out of the Budget Committee, the main question is Lindsey Graham going to stand down, or is he going to funnel ahead with his two-bill strategy? That remains to be seen right now. As I mentioned, the House Budget Committee was able to finally advance this resolution late last night at around 10 p.m. Lawmakers are out of Washington. Both chambers are out of session today. So it's not as easy to ask lawmakers what their plans are for the coming weeks, but that is definitely going to be a key question that's really going to set the tone for the rest of this reconciliation process.
What we see inside the GOP's budget resolution is tax cuts, a key sticking point for spending hawks in the parties. How will we pay for this? As Republicans in the House craft the reconciliation bill, what's going to be the biggest fight inside the party? What are they going to fight over?
Yeah, there are going to be two big ones in terms of cuts and taxes that I'm going to be keeping an eye on. The first is SALT, those state and local tax deduction cap. This is something that the SALT cap was actually put in place under the 2017 Trump tax cuts. So now it's a bit ironic that Trump is now trying to remove that cap that he had initially put in place. He said that he didn't realize it was such a big deal during 2017 when Republicans did this the first time. That's going to be a very tenuous negotiation because there are a number of Republicans in some of those high tax blue states, again, New York, New Jersey, California, who say that a SALT cap deduction increase is their red line. If there's not good enough SALT relief, they will not support this bill. Now, on the other side of the coin, Judy, you have fiscal hawks who don't want to pay for that SALT increase, especially when it's happening in some of these high tax blue states. So that's going to be one big key fight. And then the other thing is going to be potential Medicaid cuts. Look, there is a language in there to cut up to around $2 trillion in mandatory spending cuts. There's also a large floor for spending cuts for the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has some jurisdiction over the program of Medicaid. So lawmakers are expecting, and in fact, some Republicans are even saying that they're going to have to cut Medicaid to reach these levels that were laid out in the budget resolution, in the instructions. But again, that is going to turn off a lot of moderate lawmakers, moderate Republicans who are in districts where a lot of their constituents benefit from Medicaid. So those are going to be two really key debates as we see this process play out.
Michael, as you know, on Thursday, President Trump announced these reciprocal tariffs on both adversaries and allies. During a press conference with India's Prime Minister, the president had this to say.
It's very hard to sell into India because they have trade barriers, very strong tariffs. We are right now a reciprocal nation. We are going to, if it's India or if it's somebody else with low tariffs, we're going to have the same. We're going to have whatever India charges, we're charging them. Whatever another country charges, we're charging them. So it's called reciprocal, which I think is a very fair way.
President Trump made those comments, as you could see, right next to India's prime minister. Is this just a negotiating tactic? What kind of timeline are we going to see for these new tariffs?
Yeah, well, we know that President Trump in the past has used the threat of tariffs as a negotiating tactic. We saw it with China, we saw it with Canada, we saw it with Mexico. The president saying he's going to slap pretty significant tariffs on these countries unless they do X, Y, Z, and then saying that they have done X, Y, Z. So for that reason, he will take the tariffs off the table. With these reciprocal tariffs, they can kick in as soon as April, the beginning of April. But again, I think that a lot of folks have in the back of their head the history and knowing that Trump likes to use these tariffs as a negotiating tactic. So I would say it's not a done deal until they truly and officially go into place, knowing how the president operates. But nonetheless, just the announcement of the potential of these tariffs is significant. It could rattle markets. And as we know, tariffs have a tendency to raise prices on Americans, on customers, because that's just how it shakes out with additional taxes and increasing prices. So we could see just the mere threat of this have some sort of impact on the U.S. economy.
Mychael Schnell tracking everything happening in Congress for us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Judy.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams says he'll issue an executive order to allow federal immigration authorities into the Rikers Island jail complex. News Nation's Laura Ingle has the latest on this significant shift in the city's sanctuary policies.
This was an unprecedented move by New York City Mayor Eric Adams that caught many Democratic lawmakers off guard. During a meeting Thursday with Border Czar Tom Homan, Adams said he will issue an executive order to reestablish federal immigration officials to operate at the city's notorious Rikers Island jail. U.S. Immigration and Customs Services used to have agents on Rikers before the 2014 sanctuary laws were put into place, essentially limiting local cooperation with federal immigration officials. In a statement Thursday, Adams said the Joint Task Force will focus on violent criminals and gangs, even suggesting more police detectives will be added to assist. Adams has been vocal about his disapproval for certain measures in the city's sanctuary laws in the past. Here's what he had to say about how New York officials will work with ICE.
We are aligning with them on our task forces where NYPD is coming together to assist to go after dangerous gangs and dangerous individuals. We can do that, and we have done that. We've beefed up the number of detectives on some of these task forces, and we've done joint things together. We also are allowed to have ICE on Rikers Island, which they were removed off, to help with the intelligence and to be joined part of our gang units on Rikers Island.
So when will that begin?
Democratic city officials, as well as House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and immigration advocates, voiced their fears that the Trump administration has now gained leverage over Adams. Two Democratic council members said in a statement Thursday, quote, "We are prepared to defend against violations of the law, but this announcement only deepens the concern that the mayor is prioritizing the interests of the Trump administration over those of New Yorkers." Adams denied claims that he is being used by the Trump administration on Fox and Friends on Friday, with Homan saying it would be, quote, quid pro quo. In addition, Mayor Adams' immigration order is now linked with the resignation of several Justice Department officials after they were ordered to drop the corruption case against him. And it appears these resignations are a sign of resistance to the Trump administration's overhaul of the department to end what he considers weaponizing political opponents. The resignations include one of New York's top prosecutors, Danielle Sassoon, a Trump appointee, along with 5 senior-level department officials who were working on the corruption case against Mayor Eric Adams, who is accused of taking bribes. In a memo earlier this week, the Department of Justice ordered the case against Adams to be dropped, claiming it restricted the mayor's ability to devote his full attention to cracking down on illegal immigration and violent crimes. In an 8-page letter to Attorney General Pam Bondi yesterday, Sassoon laid out her disapproval for dropping the case, calling the move, quote, a breathtaking and dangerous precedent to reward Adams' opportunistic and shifting commitments on immigration and other policy matters with dismissal of a criminal indictment. And also said she was prepared to seek a new indictment accusing Adams of destroying evidence. Mayor Adams has denied any wrongdoing through this investigation. And as of Friday afternoon, there has been no official motion to dismiss. Back to you.
News Nation's Laura Ingle, thank you. Fallout at the Kennedy Center as a major star bails on her show following President Trump's takeover of the performing arts institution. Issa Rae says she's nixing her sold-out appearance that was set to take place in March after Trump seized control of the Kennedy Center. The Insecure star writing in a statement, "Unfortunately, due to what I believe to be an infringement on the values of an institution that has faithfully celebrated artists of all backgrounds through all mediums, I've decided to cancel my appearance at this venue." It marks the first major cancellation at the Kennedy Center since Trump installed himself as its board chairman. In a surprise move last week, Trump announcing he was replacing several members of the Kennedy Center's bipartisan board of trustees and designating himself as its chair. The new board, filled with Trump's allies, then electing him as chairman this week. The president has called the arts hub, quote, too woke. Other stars also eyeing the exits amid the president's moves to reshape the Kennedy Center. Producer Shonda Rhimes, opera star Renee Fleming, and musician Ben Folds all announcing they were abandoning their roles with the Kennedy Center as Trump became chairman. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Judy Kurtz. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.